She didn't cheat. Not in the way you're watching for. There were no hotel rooms, no late-night confessions, no proof you could point to and say this is where it broke. That's why you feel calm and uneasy at the same time. Because what ended didn't end loudly. It ended silently. The moment she allowed herself to feel desired somewhere else. Most men think betrayal begins with behavior. Texts, touch, sex. They watch actions like security cameras, waiting for movement. But attraction doesn't start with movement. It starts with permission. The permission to enjoy being seen. To let a look linger half a second longer than it should. To feel that small internal rush and not shut it down. That's the moment everything shifts, and it happens long before anything you'd call cheating. She didn't wake up wanting another man. She woke up wanting to feel something she no longer felt with you. Alive, chosen, electric. And when that feeling showed up from somewhere else, she didn't push it away. She didn't invite it either. She simply let it land. That's the part most men miss. You monitor behavior, but you ignore access. You look for lines crossed, not boundaries lowered. And by the time you're certain something is wrong, the real decision has already been made internally. Not to leave, not to betray, just to stop guarding the space where desire lives. She didn't cross a line. She just stopped protecting it. Men miss this phase because they're trained to look in the wrong place. You've been taught that betrayal leaves evidence. Messages you weren't meant to see. Sex you weren't invited to. Secrecy that feels sharp enough to cut through denial. So you monitor behavior like an investigator, scanning for violations, waiting for something concrete you can point at and say, "There, that's it." But women don't leave first through behavior. They leave through attention. What shifts isn't what she does, but where her awareness goes when no one is watching. While you're looking for proof, she's reallocating something far more valuable, where her sense of being alive gets fed. A woman doesn't need to touch another man to emotionally step away from you. She only needs to feel seen by someone else. That's the blind spot. Men cheat to escape pressure, responsibility, or confinement. It's an exit behavior. Women drift to reclaim a feeling they've lost access to inside the relationship. It's not about running away from you. It's about moving back toward themselves, toward the version of her that felt wanted without trying, desired without explaining, noticed without asking. That's why this phase is quiet. No secrecy is required when nothing wrong has happened yet. No messages to delete. No lies to maintain. Just an internal shift that looks harmless on the surface and devastating in hindsight. You've seen this play out in real life, even if you didn't recognize it at the time. The woman who lights up a little more when a coworker compliments her energy, not her looks. The wife who suddenly cares about how strangers perceive her, while becoming emotionally minimalist at home. The girlfriend who insists nothing is going on. And technically, she's telling the truth, because nothing has crossed the line you're watching for. But something else has. The economy of attention has changed. Validation that once came from the relationship now comes from outside it. And she doesn't shut it down because it doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like oxygen. If you want to apply this, stop asking the wrong questions. Don't ask, is she cheating, Skia? Where does she feel most seen lately? Don't monitor her phone. Observe her energy. Notice where she becomes animated and where she goes quiet. Notice who gets the version of her that feels awake. Betrayal doesn't announce itself with drama. It starts as a subtle shift in where desire is allowed to breathe. This is the moment it starts, and it's smaller than most men expect. There's no dramatic decision, no conscious betrayal, no internal speech where she tells herself she's doing something wrong. She simply notices a tension, a look held a beat longer than necessary, a comment that lands with more weight than it should, a subtle shift in how someone sees her, not as a role she plays, but as a woman. And in that instant, she makes a choice so quiet it barely registers. She doesn't shut it down. She doesn't correct it. She doesn't remind herself of boundaries or consequences. She also doesn't encourage it. She does something far more dangerous. She lets it land. This is the distinction most men never learn to see. There is a difference between being noticed and allowing yourself to enjoy being noticed. Being noticed is passive. It happens whether you want it or not. Enjoying it is active. It's internal permission. It's the moment she allows that warmth in her chest to exist without guilt. The moment she lets herself feel attractive without reference to you, nothing external changes, but internally, a door opens. And once it's open, it doesn't close easily. Why this matters is simple and brutal. Attraction is not built on action. It's built on reward loops. The nervous system doesn't care about morality. It cares about association. When her body starts linking a feeling of aliveness to someone else's attention, even subtly, the shift has already happened. Her system learns. When he looks at me, I feel awake. That's not cheating. That's conditioning. And conditioning is powerful because it operates beneath logic. She may still love you. She may still be loyal. But her biology has started updating its map of where desire lives. You see this in real life all the time. The woman who insists nothing is going on because nothing has happened. The wife who swears she would never cheat and believes it. Yet she replays certain interactions in her head, not because she wants the man, but because she wants the feeling, the energy, the reflection of herself she briefly saw in his eyes. And once that reflection exists, going back to emotional neutrality feels like deprivation. If you want to apply this awareness, stop focusing on dramatic changes and start watching micro-permissions. Notice when she stops deflecting attention and starts absorbing it. Notice when compliments from others linger longer than they used to. Notice when her aliveness shows up elsewhere first, because the first permission is never obvious, but it's always decisive. Once that first permission is granted, the shift doesn't announce itself with chaos. It reveals itself through absence. The first invisible sign is attention reallocation. She becomes more selective with you, not hostile, not cold, just economical. Eye contact shortened. Conversations flatten. You're no longer the primary receiver of her presence. You're the background she assumes will always be there. At the same time, you'll notice something else if you're honest. She's more animated elsewhere, more expressive with friends, co-workers, strangers. The laughter that used to belong to you shows up in other rooms. This isn't coincidence. Energy doesn't disappear. It just moves. And when it moves away from the relationship, it's because something else is feeding it more efficiently. The second sign is image curation, and it's subtle enough that most men dismiss it as self-care. New photos appear, different angles, a slightly altered posture, nothing explicit. Nothing she couldn't defend if questioned, but defense misses the point. Women don't dress for men they don't want to be perceived by. Every visual adjustment is an audience decision. She's not trying to seduce someone specific. She's positioning herself to be received, to be read a certain way. This isn't about cheating. It's about selection. Who she wants to feel visible to, and who she's stopped checking in with before she walks out the door. If you want to apply this awareness, don't argue about outfits or social media. Observe intention. Ask yourself who the image is for, not whether it's appropriate. The third sign is the most dangerous because it feels like relief. Emotional minimalism at home. Shorter responses, less volatility, fewer arguments. Men often mistake this for maturity or peace. In reality, conflict is a form of engagement. When she stops pushing, stops reacting, stops caring enough to correct you, it means her emotional investment has already been reduced. She's conserving energy because she's spending it somewhere else, even if only internally. Emotional silence feels like calm, until you realize she's no longer building anything with you. If you want to catch this phase early, stop celebrating quiet and start paying attention to where effort still exists. Where energy flows, attachment follows. She does this because what's breaking isn't loyalty, it's identity. Women don't chase men the way men chase women. They chase confirmation of who they are when they're desired. And when routine sets in, when polarity fades, when admiration becomes predictable and safe, that confirmation weakens. Not because you failed as a partner, but because repetition dulls reflection. When she knows exactly how you see her, there's no mystery left to awaken the part of her that feels feminine, chosen, alive. Desire doesn't die from neglect alone. It dies from certainty. This is why the drift feels so confusing to men who are doing everything right. You're present, you're loyal, you're consistent. But consistency without polarity turns admiration into background noise. When your desire becomes guaranteed, it stops functioning as a mirror. She no longer sees herself through your eyes. She assumes it, and assumption is deadly to identity. So when another man looks at her, and she suddenly feels that old electricity again, it's not about him. It's about her remembering a version of herself that went dormant. She doesn't want another man. She wants the version of herself that wakes up when another man wants her. You see this in everyday situations. The woman who says she feels invisible at home, even though nothing is objectively wrong. The wife who insists she loves her husband, but feels numb. The girlfriend who can't explain why a harmless interaction meant so much to her. What they're responding to isn't novelty for its own sake. It's contrast. It's the shock of being reflected differently, of being seen without history attached, without roles, without expectations. That reflection restores a sense of self that routine slowly erodes. This isn't about blaming women or excusing betrayal. It's about understanding the mechanism. Identity needs friction to stay alive. When admiration becomes predictable, it stops generating emotion. When polarity fades, desire has nothing to push against. And when that happens, external attention becomes seductive, not because it's forbidden, but because it's activating. If you want to apply this insight, stop moralizing the behavior and start examining the dynamic. Ask yourself where polarity has flattened, where desire has become assumed instead of expressed, where you stopped being a mirror and became furniture. This layer matters because if you misread it, you'll fight the wrong enemy. You'll argue about boundaries instead of rebuilding contrast, You'll demand reassurance instead of restoring identity. And by the time you realize what she was actually chasing, she may already be too far inside that other version of herself to come back easily. This is where most men lose the situation without realizing it. Once they sense the drift, they panic quietly and respond with the exact behaviors that accelerate it. They give more reassurance. They increase effort. They become emotionally available in ways they weren't before. More check-ins, more validation, more softness. On the surface, this looks loving, responsible, mature. In reality, it collapses the last remaining contrast in the dynamic. It tells her, without words, that nothing is at stake for you except keeping her comfortable. And comfort is not what restores desire. Here's the hard truth: most men aren't told desire doesn't return through safety alone. It returns through polarity, through tension, through the sense that something must be earned, not guaranteed. When you flood a woman with reassurance at the exact moment she's questioning her own desirability, you don't make her feel chosen, you make her feel settled. And settled is the emotional state she was already trying to escape. Your increased effort doesn't feel like devotion to her nervous system. It feels like predictability tightening its grip. You see this play out constantly in real relationships. The man who notices his wife pulling back and responds by becoming hyper-attentive, only to watch her pull back further. The boyfriend who senses distance and starts over-communicating his feelings, while her attraction quietly drains. The logic seems sound: if I give more, she'll feel secure again. But security without contrast is static. It stabilizes the relationship while flattening desire. Comfort calms. Contrast awakens. This backfires because of timing. At this stage, she isn't asking, "Does he love me?" She's asking, often unconsciously, "Do I still feel alive here?" And your reassurance answers the wrong question. It tells her the environment won't change, that the dynamic is fixed, that the version of herself she's losing won't be recovered through this relationship. That's when her attention drifts further outward. Not because you failed, but because you doubled down on the wrong lever. If you want to apply this correctly, stop chasing closeness when polarity is what's missing. Stop explaining yourself. Stop trying to manage her emotions. Instead, pull your energy back into yourself. Not as punishment, not as manipulation, as recalibration. Let your attention become intentional again, not automatic. Let her feel space where she felt certainty. Desire doesn't need more comfort at this stage. It needs contrast to remember what it feels like to wake up. What actually stops the drift isn't control, confrontation, or emotional negotiation. It's environmental correction. You don't change her choices by managing her behavior. You change the atmosphere in which those choices are made. And that starts with attention becoming earned again, not withdrawn in anger, not rationed as punishment, simply no longer automatic. When your attention stops flowing by default, it regains weight. It becomes a response, not a constant. In real life, this looks like you no longer orient your day, your mood, or your presence around whether she's warm or distant. You're still grounded, still engaged, but your focus has direction beyond her approval. Attention that must be earned carries charge. Attention that's guaranteed dissolves into background noise. The second principle is masculine self-containment. This is where most men struggle because it feels passive when it's actually disciplined. You stop monitoring. You stop scanning her tone, her expressions, her energy for signs. You stop reacting to every shift as if it requires correction. And most importantly, you stop orbiting her emotional state. When your center of gravity is internal, not relational, something changes. She no longer feels like the emotional sun you revolve around. She feels a presence that stands on its own. This isn't distance, it's density. Men who regain self-containment don't become cold. They become solid. And solidity reintroduces polarity without words. The third principle is identity reversal. Right now, she feels settled, not chosen. Settled means predictable. Chosen implies risk. When the environment shifts correctly, she starts wondering again. Am I still chosen? Not because you threaten to leave, not because you withdraw affection, but because your presence is no longer guaranteed in the way it was before. Your interest is felt, but not assumed. In real relationships, this often shows up subtly. She initiates more. She checks in differently. She becomes aware of your attention instead of taking it for granted. This is not manipulation, it's alignment. You're not playing games. You're restoring polarity by stepping back into yourself. When attention regains value, when self-containment restores gravity, when identity is no longer settled, but questioned, desire has space to return, not because you forced it, but because the environment finally supports it again. This is the final reality check, and it matters because it removes fantasy from the equation. If she's letting other men want her, it doesn't mean she's evil. It doesn't mean she planned to hurt you. It means the dynamic died before the relationship did. The structure stayed intact. The routines remained. The labels survived. But the living tension that made the bond feel alive collapsed quietly. Most men don't want to hear this because it removes the comfort of blaming a single moment or a single person. It forces you to confront timing, awareness, and responsibility instead of morality. This is where truth replaces comfort. The uncomfortable truth is that silence is not proof of loyalty. Calm is not proof of connection. And absence of conflict is not proof of desire. Many men live inside relationships that feel stable precisely because nothing is being challenged anymore. No polarity, no friction, no edge. And they mistake that stillness for security. In reality, it's often disengagement that hasn't announced itself yet. By the time attention drifts outward, it's not because she suddenly changed. It's because the environment stopped demanding presence long ago. Responsibility here doesn't mean self-blame. It means ownership of awareness. You are responsible for whether you stay asleep inside a dynamic that's quietly draining life from both of you. You are responsible for whether you confuse predictability with strength, reassurance with attraction, silence with commitment. Men who wake up early don't panic or accuse. They recalibrate. They stop chasing certainty and start restoring polarity. They stop monitoring her and start rebuilding themselves, not to control the outcome, but to become aligned with reality again. You've seen this pattern in other men's lives. The ones who said, "I never saw it coming," usually did. They just ignored the signs because nothing felt urgent. The ones who say, "She changed overnight," missed the years where nothing was changing at all. This message lands because it speaks to men in relationships, not men looking for tricks. There are no alpha tactics here, No buzzwords, no recycled lists, just psychological accuracy, clear markers, real dynamics, and a choice placed squarely in your hands. What happens next depends on whether you wake up to how desire actually works, or keep mistaking silence for loyalty until it's too late.